Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission here is, as always, to take these incredibly complex sources and, well, distill them into something you can actually use, something that changes how you see your own life.
And today we're tackling a big one.
A very big one. We are doing a deep dive into it has to be one of the most subtle, profound, and often completely invisible patterns in our development, a guardian wound.
It's a concept that really forces you to step outside the usual frames of, say, anxiety or personal history.
Right.
We're looking at a highly sophisticated pattern of adaptation.
The survival strategy.
Exactly. And the source material we're drawing from, especially the work on what's called Sophia's Descent, which is really about the maturation of embodied wisdom,
Right.
it makes you ask a very specific question.
Which is?
What happens when a person's innate, deep awareness meets an environment that just can't hold it? It's not equipped for that level of depth.
And the sources you sent over, I have to say, they are challenging. They blend neuroscience, developmental theory, deep spiritual philosophy.
Yeah.
It's a lot. So our goal today is to really unpack the mechanics of this wound. We want to understand its characteristics and, crucially, distinguish it from just feeling deficient or anxious. And then trace that long developmental path that leads to the liberation of that wisdom.
And if we can really land this, it's a fundamental reframe. It changes the entire narrative for anyone who recognizes this pattern in themselves.
How so?
We shift the whole perspective. Your fatigue, your control patterns, they stop looking like personal flaws, like a pathology, and you start seeing them as a structural function.
Something that had a job to do.
A vital job.
Yeah.
And the most important piece is that the solution isn't about fixing yourself. It's not self-improvement. It's about transferring authority, handing over the job of holding things together from your exhausted ego to a much broader, safer, embodied intelligence.
That structural function, that quiet exhaustion, it's all wrapped up in the core feeling we're looking at today. It's the mission statement of this deep dive. If I do not hold this together, something essential will collapse. So let's get into why that's not just a metaphor. It's an operating principle.
It's the nervous system's mandate.
Yeah.
That's the first and most critical thing to understand. That phrase, if I don't hold this, it collapses, that isn't an anxious thought you have.
It's not coming from your thinking mind.
Not at all.
Yeah.
It's a pre-verbal orientation. It's a posture that the entire nervous system adopts structurally.
And it happens so early, right? The sources say it forms before the ego is even fully online, which means the adaptation just becomes the foundation of who you are as an adult.
Exactly. It happens because the child's system, this very sensitive system, sensed a huge amount of complexity or depth or even just fragility in its environment.
And it looked around and found nothing.
No external structure that was strong enough or aware enough to contain it. So by necessity, the child's own system steps in to become that container.
And that creates this internal world of just constant vigilance.
Constant. It's a background process, like an app running silently on your phone, always draining the battery, a monitoring system that is perpetually on, even when you're supposed to be resting.
Which explains the deep, bone-deep fatigue.
A system never truly powers down its holding function.
Okay, but the sources are so adamant about this next point. We have to be really precise here. This vigilance, this background hum of being on, it is not standard anxiety.
No.
How do we draw that line? Because if you tell someone you feel wired and exhausted, anxiety is the first word that comes up.
Right, and it's a crucial distinction. Anxiety, in the way we usually talk about it, is fear for the self.
Am I safe?
Exactly. Am I enough? It's rooted in a sense of personal lack or threat. The guardian wound, on the other hand, is oriented toward custodianship.
Custodianship. I like that word.
It's not asking, am I safe? It's saying, is the system safe? Is the structural integrity here at risk? You're protecting coherence itself.
Whether that's the family's emotional stability or the unspoken truth in a room.
Or the depth of a project. Whatever it is, you're guarding it, not yourself.
So the pain you feel isn't personal fear or shame, it's guilt. Or this crushing weight of responsibility.
That's it, exactly. The pain feels moral. You don't feel like you're broken or deficient. You feel like you're failing at an essential structural duty. It's why guardians so often look around a room and just silently think, why doesn't anyone else see this thing that needs holding?
Well, it's because they're identified with the function, with the job itself.
Yeah, with their personal worth, yes.
Okay, let's break down the mechanics here. The sources lay out 4 core characteristics of this posture. Let's start with the one you just mentioned, this pre-verbal orientation of custodianship. What does it mean for the psyche to become a silent stabilizer?
It means it takes on an almost institutional role,
Yeah.
like keeper of continuity or holder of depth. And because this happens before you have words for it, the holding is just automatic. It's unconscious.
It's not a choice you make as an adult. It's just how you're wired.
It's just how you are. Imagine you were born with an extra sense that detects relational pressure or unspoken truths. If your environment is, let's say, flimsy,
What do you mean by flimsy?
it means the environment can sense the depth, but it can't hold it. The parents are overwhelmed or emotionally unavailable, so the sensitive child's nervous system adapts to become the container itself.
Which is why the sources call it a function, not a pathology. It was actually a brilliant survival strategy.
A life-saving adaptation by a very intelligent system.
Okay, and that logic flows right into the second characteristic. Responsibility before rest. This isn't just about being a workaholic. This goes much deeper.
It makes rest conditional. Rest is something you earn, but only after you perceive that structural safety has been achieved.
Which is never.
Right, there's this silent query always running in the background. Is everything held? Is this moment, this project, this relationship, is it secure?
And if the answer is no, or even maybe,
Then rest feels irresponsible. It feels like a moral failure, a lapse in judgment.
I can see how that would be paralyzing. I mean, if you're tasked with holding coherence itself, that's an impossible job. Coherence is always in flux.
It's a Sisyphean task. It truly is. And that's why surrender is so terrifying for a guardian. For most people, to surrender means to let go of a problem.
But for the guardian?
It feels like abandoning your post. It's a deep structural reflex that sees relaxation or spaciousness or trust as a dangerous dereliction of duty. The exhaustion is just the price of admission for that constant presence.
Which brings us to number 3. Awareness before trust. This seems to be the source of both the guardian's greatest gift and their greatest burden.
Absolutely. When there's no trustworthy external structure, be it parents, a stable environment, whatever, the system learns that survival depends on intense, intimate attention.
So awareness becomes the substitute for trust.
It has to. Trust requires some level of external consistency, which the guardian system never got. So the internal logic flips from, I trust this will be okay because the container is strong, to,
2, I will stay intensely aware so that I can make sure it doesn't fall apart.
and I will intervene at the first sign of trouble. Yes,
So it's not just passive watchfulness. It's an active form of care.
it is. The sources call it intimate attention, which is different from generic hypervigilance. Hypervigilance is often jumpy, reactive, full of anxiety spikes.
Right.
The guardian's awareness is quieter, it's deeper, it's almost contemplative in its scope, but it is relentless.
And this gives them incredible gifts.
Oh, enormous ones. Phenomenal pattern recognition, sensitivity to depth, seeing things no one else sees. But the trade-off is that trust feels like blindness. To let go of that awareness feels like being willfully negligent. Because for the guardian, to be aware is to care.
And to stop being aware is to stop caring.
Exactly.
Okay, and the final characteristic, containment before expression. This explains so much about why people with this pattern can be so brilliant on the inside, but so quiet on the outside.
Well, if your core operating assumption is that the system around you is fragile, what's the last thing you want to do?
Introduce a big, disruptive new energy.
Right. You don't want to add a big, unstructured insight or a strong, unprocessed emotion. That feels like adding force to a delicate equilibrium. So the system defaults to containment. The insight gets edited, refined, polished, and often just held back entirely.
Waiting for the perfect moment to share it.
A moment when the environment feels soft enough and safe enough to receive it, which of course rarely comes.
So they're just holding their fire.
Constantly. They feel so much, they know so much, but expression is always secondary to safety. That inner radiance, that true wisdom, Sophia, as the sources call it, has to be contained until the need for self-holding finally dissolves.
And the cost is that the world only sees a fraction of who they are.
And the guardian feels more and more isolated by the depth they carry but can't share.
Okay, let's really hammer this home. The difference between this guardian wound and the more common deficiency wound. Because if you're exhausted and inhibited and feeling unseen, the default story is a deficiency one. Something is wrong with me.
That's the crucial reframing we have to make. A deficiency wound says exactly that. Something is wrong with me. It's born from a perceived failure to get enough love or validation or support.
And it generates shame, inadequacy, a feeling of lack.
Right. Your whole life becomes about trying to prove you're enough or trying to fill that hole inside you.
But the internal monologue of the guardian wound is totally different.
It's not personal, it's structural. The guardian wound says something important needs holding, and I'm the one who has to hold it. The pain isn't from personal lack. It's from over-responsibility for the whole.
That reframes everything. The exhaustion isn't from failing to be enough. It's from the endless duty of having to be the container for enoughness.
It's the difference between feeling like a broken vessel, which is deficiency, and feeling like an exhausted atlas holding up the world.
Right.
The guardian doesn't need to be fixed. They need to be relieved of their post. And just recognizing that shift from seeing yourself as a flawed person to seeing yourself as a fatigued vital function, that's the first huge step toward healing. It lifts the shame.
It's not I should be better. It's I am structurally overburdened.
Precisely.
So if this is such a powerful adaptation, we have to look at how it forms. The sources talk about a universal function versus a personal vocation. What does that mean?
Well, the idea of containment before trust is universal. Every single one of us has to develop an ego, boundaries, internal regulation before we can safely trust the world. It's a normal developmental stage.
We all go through a guardian phase.
In a way, yes. But for some people, that phase gets dramatically accelerated and intensified. It becomes a permanent state. It becomes a personal vocation that defines their entire life.
So why? Why are certain people singled out to become this lifelong container?
It's always a convergence. It's innate capacity meeting a specific environmental trigger. You need both. Neither one is enough on its own.
Okay, let's start with the innate capacity. This isn't something you learn. The sources say it's constitutional. It's temperament. What does that actually look like?
It means the system is just. It's wired for depth from the get-go. High perceptual acuity, an early awareness of complexity, an emotional depth that just exceeds what ordinary structures can handle.
So they're born with a more sensitive instrument.
A much more sensitive instrument, like a high-end satellite system. They're born sensing the unspoken energy in a room, the latent anxiety in a parent, the coherence or incoherence of a system at a really subtle level.
And without that innate capacity, the pattern can't form.
It can't. Even in the most chaotic environment, the child has to be able to see the problem before they can decide unconsciously to hold it.
And that's where the environment's contribution comes in. And it doesn't have to be big T trauma. It just has to be an environment that can't hold the depth the child is sensing.
That's the key. The environment fails to provide an adequate container for the complexity the child perceives. And this happens all the time in what you might call loving but overwhelmed families.
The parents are good people, but they're stretched thin.
Exactly. Stretched by money or their own unresolved issues or emotional complexity they don't know how to handle. The child senses it. They sense there is a huge unspoken emotional gravity here, and nobody's taking care of it.
So the child isn't necessarily being neglected in a classic sense. They're just being left alone with a very complex truth.
That's the subtlety of it. The child feels something important is here and no one else is holding it. And so the psyche, this sensitive, intelligent psyche, just quietly steps in. It's not a conscious choice. It's a structural adaptation to maintain coherence.
Which brings up that really tricky question. Was this adaptation chosen or conditioned? Because the person feels the moral weight of a choice, but it sounds like pure conditioning.
And the only way to make sense of it is to hold both truths at once. The strategy was absolutely conditioned in form. It was a survival adaptation forced by the environment.
The nervous system had to do it.
It had to. But you could also say it was chosen in function. That consciousness in its intelligence used this highly sensitive individual as a stabilizing node because they could do it. They were the only one in the system capable of performing that function.
It was an arrangement, not a mistake.
An arrangement. And the reason it sticks is that it's often morally reinforced. Being the responsible one, the stable one, it feels good, it feels necessary, and people often praise you for it even as it's silently draining you.
Okay, this brings us to the heart of the reframe. So many people who identify with this feel like their wisdom, their true self, their radiance has been blocked or delayed. They look at others who are so expressive, and they feel like they're perpetually stuck at the starting gate.
And that feeling of being blocked is a profound misreading of what's actually happening. The sources are insistent on this. They call it the necessity of delayed radiance. That long, not shining yet phase was absolutely essential. And it was protective.
Protective of who? The person or the wisdom itself?
Primarily, it was protective of the wisdom, what the sources call Sophia. That radiance, that unmediated insight, couldn't come out earlier because it would have been instantly co-opted by the control mechanism. The guardian's ego would have grabbed that wisdom and turned it into authority or management or another tool for control.
Which leads to a kind of spiritual ego, where you're managing the light instead of just transmitting it.
Exactly that. It creates spiritual leadership without surrender, depth without humility. And that path, the path of using wisdom as just another tool for ego, it burns the person out and it harms the people they're trying to help.
So life slowed the process down on purpose.
It slowed it down not to deny the person their fullness, but to protect the integrity of the wisdom maturing inside them. This delay is what the sources call the protective timeline.
And the timeline itself, the sources mention something like 16 years for this kind of depth maturation. That tells you this isn't a cognitive shift. You can't just think your way out of this.
Not a chance. It confirms this is a somatic process. It's a developmental reorganization of the nervous system. It takes that long because the body has to learn at a cellular level how to feel safe without vigilance. And the control mechanism has to honestly exhaust itself. You can't rush that.
So reframing the delay means changing the story from I'm blocked to I'm incubating.
Exactly. You weren't late. You weren't unready. You were stabilizing. You were transferring authority. You were learning to let wisdom hold itself. You were cultivating what we could call structural light, the quiet, steady light that doesn't need applause, as opposed to the flashy, seasonal light that does. The whole timeline was just preparation.
Preparation for that wisdom to finally emerge without being hijacked by the very control system that protected it in the first place.
That's the whole arc.
This adaptation, this guardian posture, it obviously has huge consequences for adult relationships. The strategy sticks around not because the world is still so fragile, but because the mechanism itself is invisible to the person carrying it.
And it's morally reinforced. The world sees a capable, self-sufficient, intuitive person, and, well, it tends to lean on them.
So they attract partners or colleagues who need holding, which just reinforces the whole pattern.
It creates very specific and often very frustrating relational dynamics.
Let's talk about the big one, the paradoxical neediness. This is the super independent person who, underneath it all, has this profound, almost desperate need for something. What is that?
It's not ordinary dependence. It's not the neediness from a deficiency wound that's asking for love or validation. The guardian's neediness is for the recognition and containment of their depth.
Say more about that.
Remember the original blueprint? The psyche stepped in to hold what the environment couldn't. So in the present, when their depth isn't seen or acknowledged, the nervous system gets triggered. The unconscious thought is, I am holding this critical truth, and if no one else sees how important this holding is, the whole thing is at risk of collapse.
So that classic feeling of being unseen isn't personal, it's structural.
It's entirely structural. They're not looking for someone to say, you're a great person. They're looking for coherence recognition. They need someone to acknowledge the significance of the structural work they've been doing their whole lives.
Which is why simple praise or advice just misses the mark. It can even feel irritating.
It feels dismissive. It doesn't satisfy the system's core question, which is, does anyone else see the gravity of what I carry? If the answer is no, the system can't stand down.
And this explains their huge... So the key to supporting a guardian isn't to take the weight off them, but to first see and honor the weight they're carrying.
That's it. It's entirely relational. The guardian needs their inner world reflected back with depth and reverence, not with management or correction. Only when the system feels truly seen can it even begin to relax its grip.
So how does psychology even talk about this? It seems like such a complex pattern sitting between adaptation and pathology. Is there a name for it?
There's no single name for it in the DSM, no neat little box. It's a cross-disciplinary pattern. But what we can do is create a kind of translation table to see how this very deep, often spiritual experience shows up in more standard therapeutic language.
Okay, let's do that. Let's start with the core mechanism, that automatic sense of duty, the custodian reflex.
In clinical terms, that maps almost perfectly onto the parentified child, or chronic over-responsibility. A good clinician sees that the child took on adult duties way too early, resulting in a kind of brittle maturity that hides a deep exhaustion.
What about their unique brand of vigilance, that awareness as care?
Somatically, that would be called a functional freeze, or adaptive vigilance. And it's really important to distinguish it from hypervigilance. Hypervigilance is chaotic. Functional freeze is a highly regulated, over-controlled state where the system learned that stillness and monitoring are what keep things safe.
So the body is quiet, but the awareness is screaming.
Precisely.
Then there's the containment before expression, holding back their insight and fire.
That connects directly to concepts like Winnicott's false self, or just emotional inhibition. A false self emerges to perform a function the environment needs, and for the guardian, that function is coherence. The ego isn't inflated out of grandiosity, it's stepped up out of necessity.
And finally, that crushing feeling of protecting coherence itself.
That's where you get into existential psychology. It's existential responsibility or bearing the weight of meaning. Good clinicians recognize this when a client isn't just anxious about their job. They feel in their bones like they are personally holding the entire meaning of their life or their family together.
So the clinical markers for this are pretty specific. They're highly insightful clients. They get the theory, but they get stuck when you ask them to actually surrender or rest.
They can't make the shift in their body. They can give you a brilliant explanation for why they should let go, but their nervous system is still on duty. When a client tells you, if I stop paying attention, something will fall apart, they are not being dramatic. They are accurately describing this structural mandate of their system.
So where do traditional therapies fall short in treating this? I mean, there's clear alignment with somatic work, nervous system regulation, but what do they miss?
The main shortfall is that most models treat control as being purely fear-based, and they pathologize the responsibility without seeing its deep ethical roots.
They don't honor that the pattern was necessary, that it protected something real. So telling them to just let go feels morally wrong.
It feels irresponsible. The system won't relax just because you tell it to. It only relaxes when it can trust intelligence itself, a deeper intelligence, to hold the coherence that the ego has been managing.
And that's the difference between what the sources call healing versus initiation.
Yes, good therapy can help the guardian stand down. It reduces the vigilance, it helps the system feel safer. That's the healing part.
But the initiation?
The initiation is the transfer of authorship. It's about discovering who or what takes over the holding. The guardian needs that embodied insight that there's an intrinsic self-organizing intelligence, call it Sophia, call it wisdom, that can manage coherence far more gracefully than their exhausted ego ever could.
Without that final handover, the guardian might feel better, but they're still on call.
Still burdened, exactly.
Okay, let's talk about the path to resolution. It's not about letting things fall apart, which is the guardian's biggest fear. It's about letting intelligence replace vigilance.
It's about learning to rest inside responsibility, not after it. A total shift in identity from being the manager coherence to being a participant in it.
The sources point out a huge paradox here, which is that you cannot see the wound while it's active. The guardian is so identified with the role that they just see control as care. Vigilance as love.
They're blinded by their own function. The insight is always, in a sense, post-functional. The shift only really happens when that surrender becomes embodied, when that deeper feminine intelligence, Sophia, actually stabilizes in the system.
And it's an embodied aha moment.
It's a full-body realization of, oh, wow, I was guarding something that no longer needs my egoic protection. The system is holding itself. And that's what dismantles the mandate.
How does this affect their intuition? Because guardians are already so intuitive, but it's always felt like a burden.
That's the key. The change in intuition is profound. Before, intuition was surveillance. It was tied to duty. If I see a potential problem, I am now responsible for holding it.
It was fused with action.
Fused with responsibility. When the wound softens, that intuition is finally liberated. It becomes an offering of insight instead of a burden of management.
So Sophia is essentially intuition freed from responsibility.
That's a perfect way to put it. The intuition was always there. The healing process just unhooks it from the control reflex. All that energy that was tied up in vigilance is now free for creative, spontaneous expression.
So once that shift happens, life becomes about integration. How do you live from this new post-guardian place? The first step is supporting the self by building inner sovereignty.
Right. Which really means establishing that your depth and your wisdom are valid on their own, independent of whether anyone else sees them. The core practice here is moving from perfection to presence.
Trusting the moment instead of trying to control the outcome.
Trusting the process, not the product. And this requires a different kind of boundary. Not a wall to keep people out, but something more subtle.
A boundary to protect the integrity of your own inner holding.
Exactly. The sources call for gentle refusal. Gently protecting your insight and energy from people who want to manage you or correct you. Learning to say, I appreciate your concern, but I'm going to handle this my own way, without feeling like you owe them a 5-page explanation.
And the internal self-talk has to change, too.
It's critical. A practice of self-affirmation like, I am permitted to rest. I am permitted to trust my insight. I am permitted to allow intelligence to act through me. This directly counters the core anxieties of the guardian.
And what about relationships? How does this change how you show up for others in mutual healing?
The whole dynamic shifts. You move from being the manager to being a co-creator.
Yeah.
The principles become observation without intervention and permission-based engagement.
Meaning you have to wait to be invited in.
You have to. You have to recognize that your unsolicited guidance, no matter how brilliant, feels like intrusion to another person's system. So you stop offering corrections and you start offering reflections.
So instead of, you should do this, it's, I see how you're holding all of this.
Precisely. That honors their authorship. The guardian finally shifts from, I must hold everything and be seen for my duty, to, I can shine and I can let others participate in coherence without me having to control their process.
And in ordinary life, this just looks like letting solutions emerge instead of forcing them.
And modeling what it looks like to hold depth without being crushed by it.
Now, the final section of the sources really elevates this, mapping the whole journey onto large-scale consciousness structures, specifically the teal and turquoise stages from integral theory.
Which is so helpful because it shows us this isn't just a personal idiosyncratic problem. It's a structural step in the evolution of consciousness itself.
Okay, let's start at the teal stage, or fourth-person perspective. This is about systems thinking, complexity. How does the guardian strategy evolve here?
At teal, the guardian gets a huge upgrade. Responsibility is no longer a rigid, compulsive obligation. It becomes a conscious, ethical choice. The emotional charge around the word must just drops away.
They realize they're part of a larger system, not the sole person responsible for it.
They get that seeing a problem doesn't mean it's their job to fix it. It's a massive liberation.
But it's not the end of the line. Why not?
Because even at teal, the structural self is still there. There is still a one who holds awareness, a one who makes the conscious choice. The ego is refined and ethical, but it's still the central manager. So the transition to turquoise requires that final release.
Letting go of the identity of being the one who has to choose.
Exactly. The central management function itself has to dissolve.
So what does that feel like, moving into the turquoise stage? For the post-guardian, what changes?
It's the end of effortful responsibility. Awareness becomes non-local. You perceive the system from within the flow, not from a control tower above it. Action arises spontaneously. Responsibility just dissolves into participation.
So you're just doing what needs to be done without a story about it.
Without an internal reference to a burdened self who is doing it. It's a profound relief.
And the final step?
The final release is letting go of even that subtle identity as the integrated being or the witness. The goal is no center. Action, awareness, relationship. They just happen. The guardian spent their whole life trying to contain complexity, and the final truth is realizing they were never separate from it at all.
Which brings us to what might be the most profound insight in all this material. The resolution of the paradox. The final realization, nothing was ever being held at all.
And that can sound dismissive, but it's not. It doesn't deny the reality of the childhood wound or the years of exhaustion. It's an ontological correction.
What do you mean?
It means that once the shift happens, the system realizes that a separate, exhausted me was never actually required for coherence to exist. The universe was holding itself all along.
So all that effort, all that responsibility.
It was awareness contracting around experience. It was awareness identifying with the function of protection. It was love confusing itself with effort. The vigilance was a form of deep, protective love that just got stuck in its survival strategy.
And this is where the language of Sophia makes its final point.
Yes. Sophia's role in reconciliation isn't about a new force coming in. It's about awareness remembering its own feminine nature, the nature of receiving, of being held, of allowing.
It's the realization that you are already being held by the very awareness you thought you had to provide.
The deepest error the guardian made was, because I wasn't held, I must become the holder. The healing reveals that holding was never required. Love was never absent. It was just misrecognized as effort.
So let's trace that arc one last time from start to finish.
The arc starts with original, fire-pure, innate awareness. That fire meets an unstable environment and becomes the guardian adaptation, the ego's survival strategy. Through deep work, we build the bridge of witnessing and presence, which allows for the emergence of Sophia awareness as love, fully integrated, transmitting that original fire without the ego's distortion.
And the outcome is a system that just operates from a place of intuitive safety. The ego, once the exhausted manager, becomes a flexible tool. Awareness no longer contracts into a burden, it arises as spaciousness.
The final reframe is this. The guardian learned first to hold, then to choose holding, then to release the one who holds, and finally to discover that nothing was ever being held by them at all. The entire journey was just the necessary maturation for wisdom to become truly free.
Wow, this has been a truly profound exploration. We've taken that crushing feeling, if I don't hold this, it all falls apart, and reframed it. It's not a sign of a flaw, but evidence of a deep, necessary protective function that was keeping your innate wisdom safe.
And the liberation is in seeing that the long, frustrating wait wasn't a delay. It was incubation. You weren't blocked, you were stabilizing. The deepest reconciliation is realizing that all that intense effort was just awareness confusing its own protective love with a crushing duty.
So the journey ends in resting in presence. And the ongoing challenge for the post-guardian isn't to avoid collapse, but to allow that spacious, quiet, non-compulsive awareness to be the new default. You're not above structure.
Yeah.
You're just no longer trapped inside the one you had to build.
So we'll leave you with a challenge for this week. Find one small area of your life, a meeting, a family conversation, even just loading the dishwasher, where you feel that familiar pull to control and manage the outcome. And instead of jumping in, just pause. Take one deep breath. And see if you can allow intelligence to act without your ego's control. Trust that the field itself knows how to hold coherence. Just try resting in that non-compulsive awareness and notice what wisdom arises in the space you create.